rather than kind of information. Another big difference is that the Federal Advisory Committee considered fatality studies as being common, that is, they'll occur at most facilities, but habitat impacts will be relatively uncommon. So the concern about habitat will not be great at all facilities, so all facilities will not be expected to do habitat studies after the project is constructed. The Fish and Wildlife Service guidelines includes habitat studies for all facilities. So those are the kind of things that are the differences.
If I could ask another question on curtailment, and you referenced some of the studies that have been completed, Pennsylvania, I think, probably Castleman, and in Virginia, as the RAP was considering aspects of the PBR, and curtailment was one that was a lot of time was spent on. What I guess seemed to me as a general acknowledgement that curtailment, as illustrated by that study, Castleman, and some others, with respect to bats, showed considerable promise, I think is the way I would say it. Certainly there are more studies to be done, but it seemed to show considerable promise. And the regulation as it is now requires curtailment by developers over the lifetime of the project to be informed by post-construction monitoring and so forth. My question then actually is about curtailment with respect to birds. I understand there's been some work done there, perhaps in Texas, using technology that I think deploys maybe a SODAR type measurement that would be able to determine large flocks of birds. Is that very well developed, or is it in an infant stage, or does it show any promise at all? How would you describe that kind of?
First, let me address this issue of doing curtailment of all studies. Ed Arnett, who led the study at Castleman, and who's a respected bat expert around the country, will tell you that that needs further evaluation. It's not ready, Ed would say, not ready for prime time. It needs further evaluation. Sure, it worked in a couple of pre-situations, but limited information about differences in bat species presence and those kind of things. So he's not ready to say that curtailment should be applied uniformly. And now the work in Texas. So the work in Texas is, I don't know how to, well, I'll be pretty straightforward. I usually just in trouble. There are vendors who have certain kinds of technology who have said that if you use our technology, you can see these birds coming. You can shut your facility down. There was no empirical evidence to support that, but there is a study ongoing to evaluate that. Whether it's successful or not, we don't know yet. But it will be. I'll be skeptical and say it's hard to imagine that will likely work for birds, particularly in areas where we have large numbers of migrating birds. For example, we had radar going on at Buffalo Ridge in southwestern Minnesota, where coincidentally with fatality studies, and we found fatalities at the site when something like 1.5 million birds were flying over the site. See them on radar, but we found a few hundred birds at the site. So you could see, and with broad front migrating species like nocturnal migrating passers, I guarantee you can see birds on radar. Almost any night you want to turn the radar on during the migration season, you're going to see birds on the radar. So how you can translate that into reducing risk of collision is what confuses me. I just don't understand that. But I should be waiting for the end of the study.
What was the other type of mitigation that you think might prove effective other than curtailment?
Yeah, so the Bat Conservation International has been doing some work with, Ed Arnett calls them bat begons. They're devices that emit sounds that interfere with bat echolocation. The devices are attached to the turbine cells, and they did show some reduced use around, in a pilot study around a pond, an area where you can hide bat use, and there are some preliminary results suggesting it might actually reduce use around turbines, but that's still in early stages of development. That's much less tested than the
Those developers, we spend a lot of money on bird and bat pre and post construction studies. If you were able to wave a magic wand, knowing what you know about all of the species, and you could redirect or reallocate that money, would you do it any differently than we're doing it now?
Probably. I think we know enough, for example, about nocturnal migrating passerines that I don't think there's a lot of value in doing a lot more radar work. Perhaps there still is value in doing some radar work along the coastal areas, particularly the Gulf Coast, but over most of the country, I'm not sure there's much value in that. I think I would focus my attention on the problem species like bats, like ways of reducing risk through additional studies of these mitigation measures, perhaps others. Raptors, particularly golden eagles, are an issue that the industry really needs to figure out a way to deal with. And there are other T&E species that will cause problems in local areas that should receive lots of attention. And geographically or regionally, I'd say that the impact on prairie nesting, prairie grounds, it needs to be resolved. And that's not one that couldn't be resolved. The technology is available to know how, to measure how those birds would respond to the turbines and those power lines. So we could do that. But we really need some good before and after studies with some controls so that you can address that question, because now you have experts and advocates claiming impacts up to 6 miles. And without good information, it's really hard to get into these debates about arguing over whose opinion's right rather than whose is. So I would focus on problem areas. And frankly, I think the AWWI, the American Wind and Wildlife Institute, is headed that direction. Tabor Allison that's his focus. And so I think that's the way to go.
Is the concern for Goldens in the east anywhere near what it is in the west?
Well, there's concern about Goldens, particularly in the northeast. But I don't think that the agencies have near the concern that the agencies in the west have, because I know the Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't have the concern that they do in the west, because the service is real concerned about actually population level changes of golden eagles in the west, and I haven't heard that concern in the east.
It seems like there's a heightened sense of awareness in the east with the agencies in the recent year, I would say even. But we have a lot of facilities and a lot of post-construction turbine searches with, to my knowledge, not a single golden killed in the east. So as developers, we look at that and go,